Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Gifted Learner's Guide. I'm your host, Zachary Pointer, and in this podcast, we are trying to focus in on the relationships of gifted students. That means we're talking about the relationships between gifted students and other students, or between them and their teachers, counselors, administrators, parents, and so on. These relationships bring in their own benefits and their own difficulties, so we're aiming to learn a bit more about how we, as the people in a gifted student's life, can help support them. For this week's episode, I'm joined by Nina Williams. She is currently a 7th grade language arts teacher and has been teaching for 4 years. She is also a former gifted student herself, being identified in the 2nd grade and moving through the gifted program until she graduated from the same district that she currently teaches in. I was lucky enough to sit down with Nina and talk about her experience with gifted education as both a teacher and a former gifted student. So, let's find out what she had to say. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Gifted Learner's Guide. Today, we are joined by Nina, and she's going to be helping us learn a little bit more about the social emotional needs of gifted students. So, Nina, can you give us a little bit of a description of who you are for us?
All right. Hi, I'm Nina, as Zach introduced me as earlier. I am both a former gifted student. I was identified as gifted in the 2nd grade. And I am also now a teacher who interacts and works with gifted students.
Perfect. So your relationship with gifted education then, you said from 2nd grade on, and now as a teacher you interact with students who are gifted as well.
Yes.
And you're at the middle school level.
I am. I teach 7th grade.
Okay. So from your perspective then, either as a teacher currently or as a former gifted student, how do you think social relationships affect gifted students? And do you think that's different than normal, or is it the same?
I think it's a bit different. Coming as a gifted student, or formerly gifted student, I definitely got the sense, like, sometimes it's a little difficult. I'm not trying to say, to talk with other people, but there are, I think, some societal pressures, especially on gifted students, because I know I really had a difficult time asking for help when I was in the gifted program, because I was like, okay, all these people, like, oh, she's gifted, like, she's in the signet, that, and if she doesn't know it, she's dumb. And that was a really difficult thing, and I do see that in a couple of my students who are identified as gifted, but I do think being in the gifted program and interacting with other kids who had the similar issues was very helpful. And it did actually help me kind of grow past that, especially once I transitioned. And I know we're going to be talking about transitioning later, but once I transitioned into high school, I think that helped me a lot.
Okay. So another thing too, so coming in at 2nd grade with gifted education, and since you don't teach 2nd graders, do you think that the gifted education program for the district that we're currently in, do you think that changes from elementary to middle to high school?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it changed for me. I remember 2nd grade, it was a small group setting where one of the big focuses was on, like, vocabulary.
Okay.
And we had this really fun book that would teach us more difficult vocabulary words through a story. For example, we learned the word heretic. And they taught us in the sort of guise of Greek mythology, right? Relating to Hera instead of worshiping Zeus and that kind of thing. So it was really interesting. Once we hit about 4th grade, the gifted program changed and we started going into centers. And that continued on into middle school. Started to shift a bit in 8th grade because I know we had like a capstone project. Mm-hmm. And then in high school, we went into Socratic seminars for our gifted program.
Okay. So I'm going to jump ahead in the questions here then so we can kind of continue on that track. The transition from middle to high school, since you and I, we both teach middle school.
Right.
A lot of our students don't go to high school with the same students they're in middle school with. Mm-hmm. How do you think that affects gifted students in particular?
I think one of the big things, because I did not go to the same high school as a lot of my gifted friends. I had a few people, but not often. And I know the big shift from, okay, you work with these people, you've been working with these people, and then all of a sudden now you don't have them anymore. It's a bit intimidating at first, especially since we went, like I said, into a Socratic seminar sort of space. And now you're having these really deep conversations, because I remember in particular one of our subjects one day was, what is music? And we kind of, argued and discussed what qualifies as music. And it's a little difficult to start with. I mean, that one's a bit easier, but to talk about these higher topics with people you're not comfortable with yet, because, all students, I think, have a difficult time transitioning from middle to high school because it's a lot bigger. Things are, a lot of your friends aren't there. People go to specialty programs, and it's different. But I definitely think it helped me because, at first you're like, oh my gosh, it's difficult. I don't know these people. But having those bigger topics to discuss and work through really does build a bond. And I was pretty tight with the people that I met through the gifted program.
Okay. And so then, I guess to build on that, as a teacher, do you see a similar experience for your gifted students at the middle school level, or is it different?
I think it's a bit different. My kids are pretty fluid with their interactions. It's not as tight-knit. I mean, of course, all students have their little groups, but I think I see my kids who are in the gifted program, and they definitely have a wide array of friends. I do see it definitely changes their interactions. I know several of my gifted students often help some of their friends, who are maybe lower levels. Like, I teach a lot of ESOL students, and I see a lot of times my gifted kids will pair up with like another ESOL student, or with an ESOL student, kind of help them out. And I think they learn a lot from one another because I've seen them work pretty well together.
Okay. And so another, I guess, piece of the education system when it comes to gifted students is technology, right? We as a society have advanced quite a bit since even we were in middle school. Yeah. So how do you think technology in particular affects relationships between students? And is it different in affecting all students versus gifted students, or like you mentioned, ESOL or English as a second language?
That's a difficult question. It's a big question because I think our students now are a lot more invested in social media, and it has a lot larger presence in their lives than it did for us. I know I had like MySpace and Facebook when I was like middle school and into high school, but they're always constantly, whether it's, texting, Snapchatting, TikTok, any of those social media sites that they have, Instagram. It definitely has a bigger impact. You do or say something and someone tweets it or someone puts it on Instagram or Snapchats. And I think it kind of is more intimidating. It makes social interaction a little bit more, like I said, intimidating because, okay, you have to be careful what you say and you do because someone is going to sneak their phone out. And I do think it probably has a bigger effect. I think it is helpful in the case that it does enable them to socialize more. Because almost like I have a group of kids and they always talk about, on the FaceTime last night. So they're constantly like FaceTiming and talking to one another, which, I mean, it's better in that case if it's their friends. But of course, there are also negative sides to that instant communication.
So I'm going to ask you a tough question then.
Okay.
Technology and social media in particular.
Yeah.
Do you think that is a good thing for students?
I mean, there's pros and cons. I know.
Question, yeah.
I think overall, I'm going to be a bit controversial and say it's probably more negative. I have seen a lot of my students going through cyberbullying. And yes, we had that when we were younger, but it wasn't as bad at this. I mean, kids now have Finstas, which are alternative Instagram accounts, so that they can shadily do things. And we've even seen that kids have made Instagram accounts and Snapchat accounts for the schools posting negative things about other students and teachers and staff. So I honestly think it's more negative.
Okay.
Yeah.
So moving on from the technology conversation then, just in general in terms of relationships, and this could be peer-to-peer relationships or teacher to student or parent to child.
Yeah.
In your own personal opinion, what do you think could be done to maybe improve any problems that exist in terms of social needs and social relationships?
I think one of the biggest things is to kind of make that more of a focus. I think especially this year, which obviously, yes, we have to make up for loss of learning given the pandemic, but everyone talks about, we need to be there for these students, but I'm not seeing a lot of that happening. I think for example, Fairfax County has done something amazing. They are now mandating recess for middle schoolers next year.
I saw that, yeah.
I think that would be phenomenal for gifted and non-gifted students alike, because I took, after an exam, I took my students out, and they had a blast. For about, 40 minutes, obviously, if it was a recess, it would be shorter. But they interacted with all their friends, because we took the whole 7th grade out. And so you got to see kids find their friends that they don't see, because, they're in a different class, on a different team. And I think doing something like that, having an outdoor time, maybe even 15 minutes, not even, it doesn't have to be long, but getting them that chance to express themselves, be with their friends, and just even get exercise would be so helpful. And just getting, out in the sun or just relaxing, because they are high strung right now. And I know we're seeing behavior issues across the board. And I think being able to do something like that to relieve stress and just to build those relationships, because they build it with us as well. Being able to talk and interact with us outside of a purely just I'm teaching you this or we're working on this setting is very helpful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think one thing that gets overlooked a lot, and I feel like I say this all the time, is that gifted students are still students.
Yes.
It's part of the name in there. They're still, for us, especially in middle school, they're 12, 13, 14. They're kids.
Yes.
They need to have that time to interact socially, time to play. So overall, though, I think we kind of covered most of the questions that I had for you. Are there any last comments or anything that you would like to share, whether it's about yourself, your own experiences with gifted education, or just as a teacher?
I just want to say, and this is something I'm really glad that I've been hearing more about, is that the gifted students are not usually as looked at as a special group as, say, ESOL or special ed, and they absolutely need to. Because for whatever reason, they are, either it's language-based or math-based, a bit higher, and they need to have that challenge because, and I think we as educators know this, when kids do really well, get stuff done, they get bored.
Oh, yeah.
And when they get bored, that causes problems, and that can be something, it could either be something visual, like they're acting out, or it could be something that we don't see, they have some inner turmoil, which I definitely think I'm glad it's being more recognized, because it needs to be. Those kids deserve to be focused on as well, and focusing on them could help us also with other students. Yeah,
I would agree with that as well. Well, Nina, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. I want to give a huge thank you to Nina for sitting down and talking to me about her experience with gifted education. I think one of the things that she touched on that I want to make sure is brought up again is the idea that gifted students are still kids. It's easy to forget that fact when you're having an in-depth conversation with a student about politics, but they still need to run around with their friends and enjoy their time as a kid. I completely agree with Nina's comments about recess still being good for middle school students because they need time to connect with their peers, and it almost is always easier to do that outside of a classroom setting. And, ending with a specific quote from Nina, she says, quote, "When kids do really well, get stuff done, they get bored. And when they get bored, it causes problems." End quote. It's our job as educators to alleviate these problems, and giving them time to spend with their peers and prevent that boredom can make a world of difference both in our classrooms, but also in that gifted student's life. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week for another episode of the Gifted Learner's Guide.